So a while back, I was reading in the Christian Standard, and they were telling about a sermon series that Clayton Hansel did with The Crossing. That's a multi-site church out in Illinois and Iowa. And Clayton Hansel did a rather lengthy series, about 3 months, on mental health. And I wondered when I started reading the article how that went over. And then I found out that during that series, their attendance increased by 20%, and 176 people were baptized. And I thought, that guy is scratching where people itch. He has found something that obviously resonates with people. He's talking about something people are interested in, and it shows in their increase in attendance, and it shows in the number of people who became Christians during that series. Hansel and his staff did a survey of their congregation prior to the series, just to kind of get a feel for where their people were and find out maybe what the needs were. Well, here's the results of that survey with over 2,000 responses. Only 6% of the congregation said that they had no emotional health concerns. 82% of the congregation confessed that they were struggling with anxiety or worry, which is, by the way, the number one mental health concern for Americans in general. 71% of the congregation said that they felt burned out and stressed. 48% of the congregation reported feelings of depression. 51% said they were struggling with self-esteem issues. And get this, a full 9% of the congregation confessed to having thoughts about self-harm during the survey. That means if you were sitting on a pew with 10 people taking that survey, one of you was thinking about suicide at that moment. Maybe there is a need to talk about mental health. So for the next couple of months, we're going to do just that. Now, I want you to understand, I got the idea from Clayton Hansel and the church out there in Iowa. But these are my sermons, so if I say something that you don't like, don't blame him, blame me. And maybe you're wondering why I would think that this series would even fit Pinehurst. Why should I take something that's been preached out in Illinois and Iowa and think that it might fit us? Well, that's because I started reading some of the statistics that apply not only in that congregation, but in America. Gen Z, those who are born after 1999 and up till about 2015, they are considered to be the most stressed out generation ever. The number of high school students who say they experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness rose from about 22% prior to COVID to being over 46% today. Suicide is the number 2 leading cause of death for young people under the age of 24. The only thing that brings death to young people more than suicide are accidents. Let me go to the other end of the spectrum. About 28% of the senior citizens in America claim that they struggle with depression. About 8% of Americans struggle with substance abuse issues. 19% of Americans deal with anxiety issues, including 7% of children. About 18% of the people age 45 and older are taking prescriptions for their mental health. According to the National Center for Drug Abuse, 59 million people in this country have used illegal drugs in the last year. Get this one. 91.5% of men and 60.2% of women have consumed pornography in the last month. Do those statistics say something about the need for talking about mental health? You know, part of the problem is that when people ask how we are, we're less than honest. We say, we're fine. Last fall, after I broke my leg, I was standing in the doctor's office and we were looking at that gap in my x-ray, and the doctor said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "Fine." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, that's an acronym for feelings inside, not expressed." That's what we usually do when we say we're fine. Feelings inside, not expressed. Now, I know that sometimes when people ask you how you are, they don't really mean it. It's just a greeting, and they don't want to hear your litany of troubles. So saying I'm fine and going on with the conversation, doing your business, that's acceptable. It makes sense. I have a lawyer friend who, when somebody asks how he is, he loves to say, "Outstanding." And he says it works because it freaks out the other people. You know, particularly the other lawyers, they're wondering what he's got up his sleeve that's about to be laid on them in court. Well, sometimes fine works. But sometimes people really ask, "How are you doing?" And they really want an answer. They ask because they sincerely care, and they want us to take our mask off and tell them how we really are down deep inside. And fine is just feelings inside, not expressed. Problem with that is that it's dishonest. We're not really fine. Kendall Inskeep's song, "Honest." Every time I walk out of the house, put on another face just to blend in with the crowd so nobody sees me. You would never believe me anyway. I tell you that I'm whole, but I'm still healing. I tell you that I'm happy, but I'm grieving. Thought I was a fighter, I'm still in the fire. But if I'm being honest, I'm not being honest. I'll give you roses just hoping you don't see the weeds in my garden. If I'm being honest, I'm at my darkest. I'm sitting here waiting and praying for someone to show me what love is. Just being honest. Just being honest. Lots of times we're not fine. We're struggling and we need to talk to somebody. And so it's kind of dishonest for us to just slough off the question and say, "Oh, I'm good, how are you?" Maybe we need to take off that mask and we need to talk. Do you know sometimes what we're doing short circuits the fellowship that God intended for us to have? Galatians chapter 6 verse 2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you'll fulfill the law of Christ." But here's the truth. I can't carry your burden with you if you don't share it with me. And you can't carry my burden if I'm not transparent enough to tell you where I am and what's going on in my heart and in my life. The church is intended to be a hospital for sick people, for sick sinners. But sometimes when we say we're fine and we shut other people out, we short circuit that fellowship. We abort the patient. There's no caring going on. So maybe what we need to do is to admit that in the garden of our lives, there are some weeds growing, and we need help with those weeds. Now, I think if you look at your life, you'll find that the emotions, the troubles that you're experiencing, the weeds in your garden, probably fall into 4 general categories. They come from 4 roots. And as I describe these for you, see if maybe your problems come from one root or maybe more than one root. First of all, there are the situational burdens that we bear. The times when we're really not fine because of something that's happening in our life right now. A major illness. A tragedy that just occurred in our family or for somebody that we're close to. Maybe we're butting heads with somebody. There's a period of conflict going on. It's very unsettling. Maybe we're angry because we've been mistreated. And frankly, we're so mad that right now we're not even thinking clearly at all. Or maybe we're worried because there's something out there that we're just not sure how that's going to work out. And it could be a real problem. And what are we going to do when it comes? Sometimes our mental illness, our mental unhealth comes just because there's a situation that we're experiencing right now that we don't know what to do with it. We're struggling. Maybe that's you. Or maybe some of your problems come from things that have happened to you in the past. Some of your personal history. Did you know that about 20% of the women in America were sexually abused as children? But if you were to ask women who are incarcerated, about 50% of the women in prison will tell you that they were sexually abused as children. Do you think that might have something to do with why they're there? 74% of serial rapists were themselves sexually abused when they were kids. Sometimes it's the things that happened to you long ago that leave you wearing scars, that have you carrying burdens that you may carry the rest of your life. Maybe you grew up in the home of an alcoholic. Tony A, that's the way you refer to somebody who's in Alcoholics Anonymous, just a first name and a middle or a last initial. Tony A kind of put together a laundry list of characteristics of people who grew up in an alcoholic's home. He said, "We became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. We became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. We're frightened by angry people and by any personal criticism. We either become alcoholics, marry them, or both, or we find another compulsive personality, such as a workaholic, to fulfill our sick abandonment needs. We live life from the viewpoint of victims, and we're attracted by that weakness in our love and friendship relationships. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it's easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults. We get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. We become addicted to excitement. We confuse love and pity and tend to love people that we can pity and rescue. We've stuffed our feelings from our traumatic childhoods, and we've lost the ability to feel or express our feelings because it hurts so much. We judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. We are dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience the painful abandonment that we received from living with sick people who were never there for us emotionally. Now, some of you are thinking, I don't understand any of that. But for those of you who grew up with a parent or a grandparent who was an alcoholic, you're saying, yep. Because it fits. Sometimes there are those things that are part of our past, and it's a long time ago, and we like to tell ourselves we've forgotten about them and moved on, but the truth is those things are still in there. And they still hurt. And they still affect who we are. Maybe that's you. Sometimes mental health issues are simply biological, and we need to understand that, because sometimes we think people have control over their mental health issues, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people are mentally ill in the same way that they are physically ill. It comes from maybe the chemical imbalances in the brain or an insufficiency of something like lithium. Sometimes mental health issues come because there are infections in our body or because our hormones are out of whack. Sometimes genetic factors lead to things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or depression. If you go to a counselor to talk about your mental health and your counselor is competent, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, when's the last time you saw your doctor? And the reason they're going to ask you that question is you can't counsel with somebody who's dealing with a problem that has a biological root. You can talk about it forever, but you can't fix it. If somebody is suffering because there's a chemical imbalance in their brain, counseling may help them to understand the problem, but it won't really help them fix the problem. They need a medical doctor to help them figure out how to get those brain chemicals back in balance. So maybe that's you. And maybe you take a medicine regularly to kind of help. You should not be ashamed of that. That's no different than somebody who's taking an antibiotic to get over a cold. It's just required. Sometimes our problems have biological roots. And sometimes our problems, they start from the Spirit. Now I know, in one sense, all problems are spiritual problems. Because after all, we were living in the Garden of Eden and everything was perfect. We had God and we had one another and couldn't get any better, right? And then Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and of evil. They broke God's commands. And that's when the problems started. That's when we became mentally unhealthy. Think about it. As soon as they ate, they realized that they were naked and they went into hiding. Covered themselves up with fig leaves, and then when they heard God coming, they hid. And they're afraid. God's coming, we're in trouble. And they're blaming each other. There's conflict in what used to be a harmonious relationship. God says, why'd you do it? Adam says, oh, it's the woman you gave me. In a lot of sense, all of our problems are spiritual problems because they do go back to the Garden of Eden and to the choice that was made there and the way we fell from grace. But you know what? There's a personal sense in which your problems might be a spiritual problem. Some folks have addictions like pornography, gambling, eating, shopping. At their root, those are spiritual problems. We're looking for something that makes us feel good about ourselves, something that makes us feel good about life. And when we find something that makes us feel a little bit better, we overdose on it. It's a spiritual problem, Because ultimately, the only person who's really able to make us feel better about ourselves and stay consistently at that level is Jesus Christ. But we don't turn there naturally. We turn to those other things that create some dopamine in our brain and make us feel better temporarily, and then we go back for more. Some people carry the spiritual burden of guilt. Sometimes from things that happened a long time ago. Sometimes from things that happened just a few minutes ago. Sometimes from things that never really happened at all. It's a false guilt. But we're the kind of person who carries that burden for others, and we think everything's our fault, and we just walk around feeling guilty all the time. That's a spiritual problem. And Jesus can help us get rid of guilt. Sometimes the problem is loneliness, isolation. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, Solomon writes, "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up." And maybe you're feeling like that person who has nobody to help you up. Maybe you feel like right now there's not really anybody who cares much about you. You don't have a close friend, a close confidant. There's nobody that you could really go to talk to about your burden. Nobody would understand anyway. That's called loneliness. It's a spiritual problem. Some people find no joy in life because they can't get out of the rut. You see, to get out of the rut, you have to take a risk once in a while. You have to try something new. You have to be around somebody that maybe is a new relationship. And some people just can't take a risk. They can't break out of their routine. They can't risk a new relationship because they don't have control of what might happen. That's a spiritual problem. Jesus makes it possible for us to take risk. He says, I'm in control. I can make sure that all things work to the good of those who love me, are called according to my purposes. I will be with you always to the very end of the age. But we forget that. And we're afraid that if something gets out of control, we might not be able to get control back. And so we just stay in our rut, live by our routines. It's a drudgery. We hate it day after day after day after day. But we don't have the courage to change it. Lots of problems are spiritual problems. Here's what's discouraging to me. Mental disabilities are the leading reason for disability worldwide. Mental disabilities are the leading reason for disabilities worldwide. How many times have you seen somebody who was living on Medicare, Medicaid, public assistance, and you've thought, there's nothing wrong with them. They can go out and get a job like everybody else. Why should we have to pay for them to have the easy life? And I know there legitimately are some people who are freeloaders, and there's no reason they couldn't work, and they need to be told to get a job. But lots of times, we need to stop and remember, mental disabilities are the leading reason for disability worldwide. We don't always know what happened to those people in the past. We don't know what's going on in their body chemistry and how messed up the chemicals in their brain might be. We don't know what they're struggling with right now. we shouldn't judge. We need to give grace. Because the truth is, even if that's not us right now, it's probably going to be at some point. Do you remember that very first statistic I gave you? When Clayton Hansel surveyed the people at the crossing and they were getting ready to do that sermon series on mental health, and only 6% of the congregation said that they felt mentally healthy at that point. Do the math. 94% of them are struggling with something at that moment. Chances are, even if you're in that 6% this morning, you're going to be down here with the 94% of the rest of us later. It just happens. And so the truth is, if our life is a garden, every single one of us has some weeds in that garden. Things that are not growing, not the way we want them to be, things that are not always that healthy. We've got things in our garden that we wish we could get rid of, but we don't know how. We're not a good gardener. But here's the thing. We have a good gardener. We have somebody to help. The Jewish historian Philo said that the Jewish high priest should be a person who has his own feelings under total control, and he must never show pity. That's what Philo said. God went totally the other direction. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, and yet he did not sin. Eric Raymond took the life of Jesus Christ apart, and he analyzed the problems that Jesus experienced while he walked in our sandals. He said, Jesus was homeless. His family thought he was crazy. His best friends turned their back on him, and one of his closest friends sold him to be killed for money. Jesus stood face to face with the devil and endured all of his demonic tricks. He dealt with death, his own, and the death of people he cared about. He endured gossip and slander. He endured periods of hunger. His preaching was critiqued. He received criticism of his ministry. His theology was mocked. His message was rejected. So pick your problem. Look at one of those weeds in your garden and ask yourself where it comes from. And I bet if you look at the life of Christ, you can find something that he experienced that's very similar to what you're feeling right now. And that's why in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17, we're told that this is the reason that he had to be made like them, like us, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help those who are being tempted. We've all got weeds in our garden, but we've got a good gardener. Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about some specific areas of mental health. Talk about self-esteem. We'll talk about the times that we struggle with relationships with others, our need to be loved. We'll talk about depression, suicide, and some of those other things, but we'll talk specifically. But here's what I want you to understand today. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to admit that there are weeds in your garden, that there are things in your life that are not what you want them to be right now. It's okay when somebody asks you, how you doing? And you sense they really mean it. It's okay to say, can we talk? Have you got a few minutes? I'm really burdened with something. It's okay to take off the mask and admit there's weeds in the garden. But while you're doing that, there's one core bedrock truth that I want you to keep in mind. It's going to undergird everything we're going to say over the next couple of months. I want you to remember this. When you have weeds in your garden, you have a good gardener. The reason that it's okay to say, I'm not okay, is because Jesus wants to work in your life and make you okay. Now, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for next week's sermon or the sermon 3 weeks from now. You don't have to wait for the one that deals with your problem. You can just say, I got weeds in my garden and I need Jesus' help. And in just a moment, we're going to stand and we're going to sing an invitation hymn. And if you've never given your life to Christ, if you've never felt the completeness, the fullness, the healing of having the forgiveness of your sins, and having Jesus promise that he's going to walk with you through life, I will be with you always. If you've never had that, you can have that this morning. Starts with admitting your need. Starts with admitting I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. And if you're ready to make that admission this morning and you want to be baptized into Christ, as we stand and sing, you come forward.